Hello and welcome back to Radiantly Rooted with Rachel. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about disconnection as an epidemic that no one talks about, along with some ways to come home to yourself. So, you know how some mornings you wake up and you think, gosh, I just have so much to be grateful for. So, why do I still feel off? You move through your day and everything looks fine on the outside, but inside there's this nagging sense that you're kind of just going through the motions, almost like you are moving through the world with the volume turned down or earmuffs on. And I don't know, maybe you felt this way too, like the second guessing, almost a feeling of numbness. You just don't feel connected to yourself like you once did. Now, sometimes that can show up as losing touch with yourself. You can't quite hear your own needs or your inner voice the way that you used to. You're so used to drowning it out. Sometimes it can show up as losing touch with the moment that you're in. You catch yourself maybe sitting at the dinner table or even walking into a room, but you're strangely distracted, thinking, I'm here, but I'm not really here. And the third way that disconnection can show up in our lives is when we feel like we're losing touch with others. So you look around at the people in your life and you feel alone and disconnected, even though you love them and they love you. So, if any of this sounds familiar, my friend, you are not the only one. We live in a world that celebrates constant doing, right? We tie our worth to a productivity. We try to be helpful. We try to be steady. We try to look like we're fine and we're holding it all together. So, of course, it feels confusing when you realize that you've lost touch with yourself and the moment you're in, and sometimes even the people closest to you. The good news is that this disconnection isn't permanent. When you begin to reconnect with yourself, with the moment, with the people around you, life starts to feel richer, more real, more like it has more depth. It feels more clear, more honest, more steady. You feel more like yourself and not the version that feels like you're always on, but the one that feels more grounded. So, in this episode, I'm going to be walking you through three gentle ways to begin coming home to yourself. We're going to talk about simple ways to reconnect with yourself, simple ways to connect in the moment you're in, body and mind, and how to connect or reconnect with the people that you care about. So, my friend, let's take a deep breath together and let's dive in. So, my first invitation to you is to create a simple daily check in ritual. Now, I know your first thought is going to be, I do not have time to add one more thing to my plate. So, let's talk a little bit about this because it doesn't have to take much time and it doesn't have to be complicated. This is for, when you feel like you can't hear your inner voice anymore, you've lost touch with who you are, you feel like you've lost yourself somewhere along the way. This quick daily check in, this sacred ritual, you can think of it as a quiet conversation with yourself. So, again, it doesn't have to be anything big or dramatic. It's just a moment where you take time out of your busy day for you. You can ask yourself, what am I feeling? What do I need? Where am I pushing too hard? It's so easy to feel disconnected from ourself when we feel like we're moving through our days on autopilot. So, this daily check in helps you to rebuild that inner bridge. It reminds you that your voice is still in there waiting for you, that you are still here. So, I'm going to share my own personal practice with you to show you how simple this can be. When I wake up in the morning before I get out of bed, I give myself 3 deep breaths. The first one, I imagine cleansing my mind. The second one, clearing my body. And the third one, cleansing my spirit. Then I name 3 things that I am grateful for. And then I choose an intention for the day. So, 3 parts to this practice: 3 slow breaths, 3 things I'm grateful for, one intention for the day. Sometimes it's a word like presence, sometimes it's a phrase like, in this moment, all is well, or I follow joy like it's my job. That's it. It takes about a minute total, but in that minute, I come back to myself. I check in with myself before the world starts pulling me in all these different directions. And then to wrap things up at the end of the day, I close about the same way. I just take a couple of deep breaths and I think about three things that I am grateful for from the day behind. And again, it's just a simple way to check in with myself at the beginning and the end of what is very often a full and busy day. So I invite you to consider how you can create your own personal check-in ritual, just a sacred check-in with yourself. And again, it doesn't have to take long, it doesn't have to be complicated. Inside my signature program, Radiantly Rooted, we walk through practices like this together. So you get the gentle prompts, the guided awareness work, and the support so that you don't have to figure out what listening to yourself really means. You learn the skills slowly over time until it feels natural again. So that's how one way that we can reconnect when we feel like we have lost ourselves or lost touch with ourselves, just to create that daily check-in ritual. All right. What about when we feel ourselves disconnected, mind and body? So, physically, you are in one place. Maybe you're at the dinner table, surrounded by family or friends. Maybe you're driving down the road and you realize that your mind is far off in la la land while your body's here in your life. We can come back to the present moment through our senses. There's a quote that I really like. It says, "The mind's first step to self awareness must be through the body." And it's attributed to George A. Sheehan. Now, so many of the women that I work with live in their heads. They spend so much time in their heads. And trust me, I get it. I spend a lot of time up there too, planning, remembering, replaying, trying to stay ahead of everything. And it's no wonder that the present moment slips away. Now, the simplest way that I have found to come back, body and mind, is through our senses because they're always there. Our body is always in the physical moment, even when our mind wanders off. So, if we can bring our mind back to our body, we can come back to the here and now. And the more often we practice this, the more of our lives we're actually present for, the more of our lives we actually get to live. Now, my favorite, I don't know, I have a lot of favorites. One of my favorite ways to do this is the 3-3-3 rule. Now, I have heard different variations of this, so you may hear something different than this one, but the one that I like is to notice three things you see, notice three things you hear, and then move three parts of your body. So if you want to try it with me, you might look around and just notice three things that you see. I see a light on the wall. I see a cup on the table. I see the shape of a tree outside of my window. Three things you see. And then notice three sounds. It might be a hum, a bird, the sound of your own breath. And then move. Maybe you roll your shoulders. Maybe you wiggle your fingers. Maybe you unclench your jaw. Again, it's nothing fancy, but it is a very simple, grounded way to return to the moment that you're already in. And those sensory anchors are woven all through my Align framework in Radiantly Rooted. You learn how to feel the ground beneath you, how to let your breath help to settle and calm your mind, and how to pull yourself back when you catch yourself moving through your day on autopilot so that you can step back into your actual life with grounded presence and mindful awareness so that you can move through your day really enjoying or at least being present for every moment that we're gifted. All right. So, the third way that disconnection tends to manifest in our lives is through disconnection from those around us. We talked about disconnecting from ourselves. We've talked about when we disconnect from mind and body. Now, thinking about when we feel disconnected in our relationships, a lot of us are feeling lonely even when we're surrounded by people. And it's not because people don't care, it's because everybody, it seems, is trying hard not to be too much. We don't want to upset anybody. We don't want to make things heavy. We don't want to ask the wrong question or put our foot in our mouth or, put ourselves in a spot where we feel vulnerable or embarrassed. So we try to keep things light, safe, surface level. My invitation to you is to let your relationships become real again so that we don't end up missing each other. I think about, gosh, my mom, she had her first stroke when she was 49, and she lived for many, many years with her symptoms, worsening and worsening over time. And it was a topic that I tended to avoid because I didn't want to make her feel worse than she already did. I didn't want to rub it in that I can move both my arms. You can only move one of your arms. Your life is so much more challenging now. But in hindsight, now I wish that I had spoken to her more about this, what was going on for her, what she was feeling, how hard her life was, because I feel like now in hindsight, I left her in isolation with, not having me, her daughter, to talk to about the things that were going on in her day to day life. I heard another example about this recently. A woman had confided in her friend that she was waiting on some rather scary test results. And, they met for, I think it was coffee or tea, I don't remember. And her friend didn't want to bring it up. And not the one waiting on the results, but the one she had confided in. And she thought she was being respectful, but the woman who was scared and waiting on these results was really waiting for someone to say, "Hey, how are you doing?" She needed someone to check in on her. And so a lot of disconnection in our relationships with others comes from two things. We don't ask the real questions, or we don't say the real thing, what's really on our mind. And it's not because we don't care, but it's because we are afraid of misstepping, of overstepping, of saying the wrong thing. And so we end up feeling disconnected, shallow, like we're missing out. It takes courage, right? So reach out to somebody and just ask, "How are you doing?" I did this recently with my newsletter, and I was so grateful for the trust people placed in me to send me how they were really doing. I got so many emails back. I said, I don't want the I'm fine that you're telling everybody around you. I want the raw truth. How are you doing? What are you carrying? What's going on for you? I got some really magical updates. I got some really hard updates, and I got everything in between. So think about somebody you care about and ask them, "What's on your heart today? How's your heart today? I've been thinking about you. What's going on in your world?" Not the "I'm fine" version, but the raw, real truth. And just see what comes up. Maybe share your truth with somebody to open up that dialogue, that courage to speak up when you need something. I could really use someone checking in this week. Or on the flip side, if somebody asks you something that oversteps that you're not comfortable talking about, you can say, "I actually don't want to talk about it right now." And that's okay too. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to be perfect for sure. It just has to be honest and real, heart centered, opening up these doors to connection so that we're not so alone in this world where we are constantly overstimulated. We're always looking at people's perfectly curated social media feeds, right? And so it can be hard for us to admit that our life is not perfect, but none of us have a perfect life, not a single one of us. So just keeping that in mind as you reconnect with yourself, as you bring your mind and your body together into the present moment, you might find that it becomes easier for you to let others meet you there too. You might find that your relationships feel more grounded, safer, more true, more honest, raw, authentic, real. So you might be wondering, is it normal to feel all three kinds of disconnection at the same time? So, disconnection when we feel like we've lost touch with ourselves, lost touch with who we are, maybe lost touch with what brings us joy, what we want out of life, lost touch with the present moment when our mind wanders away from where our body is. Um, I've heard we think like 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day. And so, trying to keep the mind present with the body is more challenging than we might think. And then losing touch with others. So I would say yes, it is probably more common than you think to feel all three kinds of disconnection at the same time. When you lose touch with yourself, you might find it harder to stay present. When you're not present, it's harder to connect with others. I mean, how many times have you been talking to somebody and either you are listening to them, and while you're listening to them, you're trying to think about your response, how you're going to respond instead of just holding space for them. Or they're talking and you realize you zoned out and you've missed what they just said. And then do you call yourself out and do you say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry I zoned out. Will you please repeat that?" Or do you just pretend like you've been listening? So these layers overlap because you have been carrying so much for so long. So, yes, it is perfectly normal to feel all kinds of disconnection, all three of these kinds we've talked about at the same time. Now, what about, when you've lost touch with yourself? It can be hard to name what you're feeling or what you need. And that is so normal as well. So many years of being responsible, a responsible adult, right? They can pull you away from your own inner world. And so that's why I invite you to start small. Maybe it's a breath. Maybe it's noticing three things around you that you can see. Maybe it is a pause to connect with your heartbeat or to text a friend you haven't talked to in a while. Just give yourself an honest moment to check in with yourself. It's totally okay if you don't know what you're feeling or what you need, but this practice, this daily check in that I offered you, that can really help to start to be able to name these feelings, to tune back into that inner voice. And your sense of self will come back gently in its own time. And then one more question that I think comes up quite often is, what if people don't respond the way that I hope? And I get that because it can be vulnerable to open ourselves up, and that fear makes sense. When you share something real, it is vulnerable. It does take courage. Most of the people that we surround ourselves with, though, they do care about us, right? They may not always know how to express it. They may not always know what to ask. And that's why I encourage you to have those open doorways of communication. And if someone can't meet you there, that doesn't mean that you were wrong to try. We all have to meet ourselves where we are. And so it simply shows you, what relationships you can lean into this practice with more, what relationships you feel safe enough to be more vulnerable and to be more authentic in. And it also shows you, which relationships might stay at more of a surface level. So let's bring all of this together. We've talked about disconnection on three levels: disconnection with our own selves, not knowing what we want or need, disconnection from the moment when our mind wanders off to la la land while our body's physically here, and disconnected from the people around us, even though we all love each other so very much. So, becoming reconnected with ourselves, it begins quietly. Again, it doesn't take a whole lot of time or effort or energy. You can start with just a minute in the morning to hear yourself again. A simple pause or a moment in the afternoon to take a look around and see what is going on in your world, to return to your senses. A moment of vulnerability or a honest, real, heart-centered check-in inside of your relationships. These tiny choices, they help to rebuild that bridge to connection. They rebuild your inner world. They help you to feel steadier and more clear, more rooted in who you are. And when you are more rooted in who you are, the people around you sense it, they feel it, and it gives them the courage, perhaps, to maybe tune in a little deeper, maybe be a little more present, maybe ask tough questions in their own relationships, or be a little more vulnerable in their own relationships. Slowly, life begins to feel more like yours again. You begin to feel more like you again. You come back to yourself. And that, my friend, changes everything. So, I do have a gentle invitation to you. If you are listening to this and thinking, wow, I can relate to so much of this, and I don't want to stay disconnected, I want to feel like myself again. You are not alone, and you don't have to figure it out on your own or squeeze it into the tiny corners of your already full life. There is a softer way forward. My signature program, Radiantly Rooted, opens this Friday, and I would love to walk with you on this journey through this next season. Now, this is a calm, supportive space where you're going to learn how to reconnect with yourself, come back to the present moment, and build relationships that feel real and nourishing. You'll create rhythms, patterns, habits, and routines that help you to feel steady again, but that fit into the life that you're living now without having to try to totally reinvent everything, right? We need practices that meet us where we are. So if this is something that stirred something inside of you, I would love for you to join the wait list. You will be the first to know when the doors open, and you'll receive the limited time bonuses that I'm only offering at launch. Here's the link to the wait list. It is rachelhupp.com/radiant. I would love to see you inside. You do not have to do this alone. And I just want to thank you so much again for tuning into Radiantly Rooted with Rachel. I hope that you found something in this episode to help you feel more reconnected to yourself, to the moment, to those around you. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Take good care, my friend. Thanks for listening to Radiantly Rooted with Rachel. If this episode brought you a little more clarity, grounding, or inspiration, I'd love it if you shared it with a friend or left a quick review. It really helps more women find this space and feel supported on their own path. And if you are craving more soulful support, head on over to rachelhupp.com to join my email list. That's where I send free resources, gentle guidance, and invitations to go deeper. Until next time, trust yourself and root in to what matters. Because the life you want, it starts by coming back home to you.